The dust swirled across the barren street of Promise Creek as Clara Jenkins stepped gingerly down from the stage coach, her gloved hand trembling slightly as she adjusted her bonnet to shield her face from more than just the harsh Montana sun. It was May of 1876, and the small frontier town represented something she'd almost forgotten existed: hope. "Last stop, madam," the driver called down, already busying himself with unloading the few trunks strapped to the top of the coach. Clara nodded her thanks, careful not to meet his eyes. The high collar of her dress and the artfully arranged scarf concealed most of the evidence, but she knew that in the bright daylight, the yellowing bruise at her jawline might still be visible to anyone looking closely enough. Promise Creek wasn't much a single dusty street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, saloon, small church, and what appeared to be a modest hotel at the far end. It was nothing like the bustling streets of St. Louis she'd left behind, but that was precisely the point. Nobody knew her here. Nobody knew Thomas, or what he'd done. Clara retrieved her smaller valise and made her way toward the hotel, keeping her eyes downcast. The journey had been long, and her ribs still ached from Thomas's farewell gift 3 nights ago. All she wanted now was a quiet room, and perhaps a bath, if such luxuries existed in this remote outpost. The hotel lobby was simply furnished but clean. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes looked up from behind the desk as Clara entered. "Welcome to Promise Creek Hotel. I'm Martha," she said. "Just passing through or staying a while?" "Staying," Clara replied softly. "At least for some time. I'm looking for work." Martha nodded, not pressing further. "It's $3 a week for a room. Includes breakfast. We don't get many single ladies out this way unless they're school teachers." Clara counted out the money from her carefully hidden purse. "I was hoping there might be employment opportunities in town. I can sew quite well, and I'm educated. Well, Mrs. Henderson over at the general store might need help. And Whitfield's saloon is always looking for girls, though that's not proper work for a lady such as yourself." Clara nodded her thanks as Martha handed her a key. Room 3, top of the stairs. The room was small but tidy: a narrow bed, washstand, and a small window overlooking the main street. Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to exhale. She'd done it. She'd escaped. The relief that flooded through her was almost dizzying. She hadn't dared ride ahead to anyone in Promise Creek. Her husband had connections not out here in Montana territory, surely, but she couldn't risk word getting back to him. Thomas Jenkins, respected businessman and pillar of St. Louis society, would never allow his wife to simply disappear. His reputation couldn't withstand it. Clara carefully removed her gloves and unbuttoned the high collar of her traveling dress. The mirror above the washstand revealed what she already knew: the bruises along her collarbone were still an angry purple. The ones on her jawline had faded to a sickly yellow-green. She gingerly touched her split lip, now mostly healed but still tender. 2 days later, Clara had secured a position at Henderson's general store. Mrs. Henderson was a busy, practical woman who asked few questions beyond whether Clara could manage inventory and simple bookkeeping. The pay was meager but would allow her to keep her room at the hotel until she could find something more permanent. It was during her 3rd day at the store that she first saw him. He came in shortly before closing, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His clothes marked him as a working man: denim pants, flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves, and boots caked with the dust of the range. The worn Stetson he removed upon entering sat comfortably in his hands, suggesting it spent more time on his head than off. "Evenin', Mrs. Henderson," he called out, his voice deep but gentle. "Got that order of fence posts in yet?" "Just this morning, Mr. Yates. They're out back." Mrs. Henderson smiled. "Oh, and this is Miss Clara. She's helping with the books and counter." Clara kept her head down, focusing on the inventory list she'd been reviewing. Mrs. Henderson had introduced her as Miss rather than Mrs., and Clara hadn't corrected her. "It was safer this way, madam," the man said with a respectful nod in her direction. Clara looked up briefly, offering a small smile. "Mr. Yates." "Owen Yates runs the small ranch just outside town," Mrs. Henderson explained. "Good customer, always pays his bills on time." Owen Yates smiled, revealing a dimple in his left cheek. "Not much of a ranch yet, but I'm working on it." Clara noticed his hands strong, calloused, but steady. Not like Thomas's soft, manicured hands that could turn to weapons in an instant of rage. "I'll need some sugar and coffee, too," Owen continued. "And maybe some of that candy stick for my foreman's boy? Kid's been helping with the chickens." As Clara gathered the items, she could feel Owen's eyes on her. Not in the predatory way she'd grown to fear from men, but with a kind of thoughtful curiosity. When she handed him the package of coffee, their fingers brushed briefly. She quickly pulled her hand back, a reflexive action that sent the package tumbling to the counter. "I'm sorry," she murmured, embarrassed. "No harm done," Owen said easily, but his gaze lingered on her face a moment too long. Clara realized too late that in her haste to gather his order, her scarf had slipped slightly, revealing the edge of the bruise on her jaw. She quickly readjusted it, but from the flicker in Owen's eyes, she knew he had seen. He said nothing, however, just paid for his goods and tipped his hat before departing. Clara felt a mixture of relief and something else, something she couldn't quite identify, as the door closed behind him. Over the next few weeks, Clara settled into life in Promise Creek. The work at the store was straightforward, and Mrs. Henderson seemed pleased with her efficiency and education. Clara found simple satisfaction in ordering the store's goods and keeping the ledger's balanced tasks that required focus and attention to detail, leaving little time for darker thoughts. Owen Yates came to the store regularly, always polite, always with that same gentle manner that stood in such contrast to his rugged appearance. He never mentioned the bruise he had seen that first day, which had long since faded. But Clara often caught him watching her with those thoughtful blue eyes, as though trying to read a story written in a language he didn't fully understand. It was early July when Clara finally ventured into Whitfield's saloon, not for employment as Martha had suggested, but to deliver a package of supplies Mrs. Henderson had ordered for Mr. Whitfield. The saloon was quiet in the late afternoon, only a few patrons playing cards or nursing drinks at the scattered tables. "Well, look who's here," a voice called out as Clara approached the bar. "If it isn't St. Louis's own Mrs. Jenkins." Clara froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Turning slowly, she saw him, Frank Doyle, one of Thomas's business associates who had attended their dinner parties in St. Louis. "Thought that was you," Frank continued, rising from his table. "What in tarnation are you doing all the way out here in this godforsaken place? And where's Thomas?" Clara struggled to find her voice. "Mr. Doyle, I'm visiting relatives." Frank's eyebrows rose. "Relatives? Out here? Funny, Thomas never mentioned you had kin in Montana." He moved closer, alcohol evident on his breath. "And funny he didn't mention you taking a trip either. We had dinner with him just last month before I headed west on business." Clara took a step back, clutching the package tighter. "I should deliver this and get back to the store." Frank reached out, catching her wrist. "Now hold on. Thomas would want to know I'd seen you. Good friend like me should send him word right away." "Please, Mr. Doyle," Clara whispered, panic rising in her throat. "Everything all right here?" The deep voice came from behind Clara. She turned to see Owen Yates standing in the saloon doorway, his expression calm, but his eyes hard as they fixed on Frank's hand gripping her wrist. "Just catching up with an old friend from back east," Frank said, though he released Clara's wrist. "Mrs. Jenkins here is married to a business associate of mine." Owen stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between Clara and Frank. "Is that right?" He looked at Clara. Mrs. Henderson was wondering what was taking so long with that delivery. Clara nodded gratefully. "Yes, I should get back." She quickly handed the package to the barkeep and turned to leave. "I'll walk you," Owen said, not really a question. Outside in the bright sunlight, Clara's legs nearly gave out. Owen steadied her with a hand at her elbow, guiding her to a bench outside the saloon. "Take a deep breath," he instructed gently. "You're safe." Clara hadn't realized she was trembling until she tried to speak. "Thank you." Owen sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "So it's Mrs. Jenkins, not Miss Clara?" She nodded miserably. I couldn't." "You don't owe me explanations," Owen said quietly. "But if you're in some kind of trouble, maybe I can help." Clara looked at him, then really looked at him. His face was honest, open, with none of the calculation or cruelty she'd grown accustomed to seeing in Thomas's eyes. "My husband," she began, then stopped, the words sticking in her throat. Owen waited patiently, his gaze steady on the dusty street ahead, giving her space to find her words. "He's not a good man," Clara finally said, the understatement of it almost making her laugh despite everything. "I had to leave." Owen nodded slowly. "Those bruises I saw when you first came to town, they weren't from the stagecoach journey." It wasn't a question, so Clara didn't answer. She didn't need to. "That fella in there, he's going to tell your husband where you are, isn't he?" Owen asked. Clara's heart sank. "Yes, Frank and Thomas are close. He'll send a telegram immediately." Owen stood, offering his hand to help her up. "Then we need to get you somewhere safe until we figure out what to do next." "We?" Clara echoed, confused by his use of the word. "Unless you'd rather handle this alone," Owen said, a small smile touching his lips. "But I've got a spare room at my ranch, and it's far enough out of town that nobody would think to look for you there right away." Clara hesitated. Going with a man she barely knew to his isolated ranch should have terrified her. Yet somehow, the thought of Owen Yates harming her seemed impossible, like fearing a sunrise. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." Owen's eyes softened. "I know enough. And out here, folks look out for each other. It's how we survive." That evening, Clara found herself in the small but tidy main house of the Yates ranch. True to his word, Owen had shown her to a spare bedroom and introduced her to his foreman, Miguel, and Miguel's wife, Luisa, who lived in a separate cabin on the property with their young son. "Luisa can bring you anything you need," Owen explained. "I'll sleep in the bunkhouse with the hands until we sort this out." Clara was overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. "You're giving up your home for me." Owen shrugged. "It's just a house, for walls and a roof. Besides, I'm off and out with the cattle anyway." Over a simple dinner prepared by Luisa, Owen explained his situation. He'd come to Montana 5 years earlier with dreams of building something of his own after years of working other men's cattle drives. "Started with just 20 acres and 6 cows," he said with a smile. "Now I've got nearly 300 acres and 60 head. Not much compared to the big outfits, but it's mine." "You built all this yourself?" Clara asked, impressed. "With help," Owen acknowledged. "Can't run a ranch alone. Miguel's been with me almost from the start. Good man with horses, and even better with people." As the evening progressed, Clara found herself relaxing for the first time in years. There was something soothing about the rhythms of ranch life, the distant lowing of cattle, the gentle murmur of voices as the ranch hands settled in for the night, the vast expanse of stars visible through the kitchen window. "What will you do?" Owen asked as they finished their coffee. "About your husband, I mean." Clara stared into her cup. "I don't know. I saved enough money to get here, to start over. I never thought he'd find me so quickly." "Men like that," Owen said carefully, "they don't usually just let go." "No," Clara agreed. "Thomas, he considers me his property. He'll come for me himself, I think." To save face, Owen nodded thoughtfully. "Then we'll be ready when he does." The next morning, Clara awoke to the sounds of ranch life already in full swing. From her window, she could see Owen in the corral, working with a young horse. He moved with a patient confidence, never forcing, always encouraging. The contrast with Thomas's approach to life, demanding, controlling, punishing, couldn't have been more stark. Luisa brought her breakfast and fresh clothes, simple but practical garments suitable for ranch life. "Senor Owen asked me to give you these," she explained. "They belonged to his sister when she visited last year." "He has a sister?" Clara asked, realizing how little she knew about the man who had taken her in. "See, in California. She visits sometimes." Luisa smiled. "He is a good man, Senor Owen. The best." Throughout the day, Clara found small ways to make herself useful around the ranch house, though Owen had insisted she rest. She baked bread, mended some shirts Luisa had set aside for repair, and organized the small bookshelf in the main room. It was among the books that she found a worn volume of poetry by Tennyson, with careful notations in the margins in what she assumed was Owen's handwriting. The discovery surprised her. Thomas had always dismissed poetry as frivolous, unsuitable for a man of business. When Owen returned for the midday meal, Clara mentioned her find. "You enjoy poetry?" she asked. A flush crept up Owen's neck. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She made sure I had books growing up, even when we didn't have much else." "It's wonderful," Clara said sincerely. Thomas, my husband, he thought reading was a waste of time unless it was a newspaper or ledger. No offense, madam, but your husband sounds like a fool, Owen said, then immediately looked chagrined. Forgive me, that was out of line. Clara surprised herself by laughing a real laugh that felt strange after so long. He is a fool. A dangerous one. Owen's expression grew serious. About that, I sent Miguel into town this morning. Frank Doyle was at the telegraph office first thing. Message went out to St. Louis. Clara's momentary lightness vanished. Then it's only a matter of time. We knew that was coming, Owen said steadily. But now we can prepare. The sheriff in town is a fair man. I've explained some of the situation to him, not all of it. Just that you're a woman who might need protection from an abusive husband. Clara stiffened. You told the sheriff about me? Only what he needed to know, Owen assured her. Jack Harper's a good man. Fought in the war. He understands that sometimes you have to choose sides, and he doesn't take kindly to men who hurt women. The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Clara found herself slipping into life at the ranch with surprising ease. She helped Louisa with meals, learned to gather eggs from the cantankerous hens, and even tried her hand at gardening in the small plot behind the house. Owen kept his distance, sleeping in the bunkhouse as promised, but they shared meals and conversation. Clara learned about his dreams for the ranch, his love of the open country, his hopes to one day build a larger house for a family when the time is right. In turn, she told him about her life before Thomas, growing up the daughter of a professor in Boston, her love of literature and music, her brief time as a teacher before her marriage. She spoke less about Thomas himself, those wounds still too raw to expose fully. But Owen seemed to understand without being told, never pressing when she fell silent or changed the subject. It was during the evening of her 5th day at the ranch that Clara found herself sitting on the porch with Owen, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in hues of gold and purple. It's beautiful here, she said softly. I never imagined Montana would be so magnificent. Owen smiled. That's what got me too, first time I saw it. Like God just opened up the sky and poured out all the colors he had left. A comfortable silence fell between them. In the distance, a coyote called, the sound mournful, yet somehow right for this vast landscape. Can I ask you something? Clara said finally. That first day, in the store, you saw the Bruises, didn't you? Owen nodded, his eyes on the horizon. Yes. But you didn't say anything. Most people, when they notice, they either stare or pretend not to see at all. Owen considered this. Wasn't my place to say anything. Figured if you wanted to talk about it, you would. I tried to hide them, Clara admitted. I was so used to making excuses, inventing stories about my own clumsiness. Owen turned to look at her then, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. You don't owe me pretending, Clara. You don't owe anyone that. Something in his words, their simple honesty, perhaps, or the gentle way he said her name, broke something loose inside Clara. Tears she had held back for years suddenly spilled over. I'm sorry, she gasped, trying to wipe them away. Don't be, Owen said. After a moment's hesitation, he reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the porch railing. Some hurts need tears to heal. They sat like that, hands touching, as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge. Clara couldn't remember the last time someone had simply let her feel what she was feeling, without judgment or impatience. Thank you, she whispered. Owen squeezed her hand gently. For what? For seeing me. The real me, not just. She gestured vaguely at her face, where the bruises had finally faded completely. You're easy to see, Clara Jenkins, Owen replied. You shine too bright to miss. 2 more days passed in relative peace. Clara found herself smiling more, sleeping better, the constant knot of fear in her stomach beginning to unravel. She caught Owen watching her sometimes with a warmth in his eyes that made her heart flutter in a way she had forgotten was possible. But the respite couldn't last. The telegram they had been dreading arrived on the 8th day of Clara's stay at the ranch. Miguel brought the news when he returned from town. Sheriff says a man arrived on the morning stage. Well-dressed Easterner asking questions about a Mrs. Jenkins. Clara's hand flew to her throat. Thomas is here? Owen's jaw tightened. Where's he staying, Miguel? Hotel in town. Sheriff told him he hadn't seen any woman matching the description, but the man didn't believe him. Said he'd be checking every farm and ranch in the area if need be. Owen nodded grimly. We knew this was coming. Clara, you should pack your things. We might need to move quickly. Where would I go? Clara asked, despair creeping into her voice. He'll just keep looking. There's a stage heading west to Helena tomorrow, Owen said. From there, you could take the train to California, maybe even Oregon. Clara looked around at the small ranch house that had become a sanctuary. Just keep running? Owen's eyes softened. It's an option, but not the only one. What else can I do? Thomas has money, connections. Even if I file for divorce, he'd never allow it. He'd rather see me dead than free. Owen was quiet for a long moment. There's another way, but I wouldn't suggest it unless. Unless what? Clara prompted when he didn't continue. Owen ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. Unless you were sure it's what you want. It would mean staying here. In Promise Creek. Clara felt a flicker of hope. Is that possible? Sheriff Harper knows a judge in Helena who doesn't take kindly to men who beat their wives. If you were willing to testify about what Thomas did to you, show documentation of your injuries. I kept a journal, Clara said quietly, hidden in my things. Dates, descriptions. I wasn't sure why I was recording it all, but somehow I needed to make it real, even if just to myself. Owen nodded. That could help. But Clara, it would mean facing him. In court. Are you strong enough for that? Clara thought about the woman she had been just 2 months ago, cowed, broken, living in constant fear. And then she thought about the woman she'd glimpsed in herself these past days at the ranch, someone with opinions and laughter, someone who could gather eggs and bake bread and sit quietly watching a sunset. I want to be, she said finally. I'm tired of running. The next morning, Clara and Owen rode into town together. She wore one of the dresses Louisa had provided, her hair neatly pinned, her head held high despite the fear threatening to choke her. Sheriff Harper met them at his office, his weathered face grave. He's been asking all over town. Seems mighty determined to find you, madam. He would be, Clara said. Has he? Has he said what he intends when he finds me? Claims he's just a concerned husband looking for his confused wife who wandered off, Sheriff Harper replied. But I've known enough men like him to read between the lines. Owen stood slightly behind Clara, a solid presence. We were hoping you could arrange a meeting with that judge you mentioned. The one in Helena. Sheriff Harper nodded. Already sent word. Judge Wilson can be here day after tomorrow. In the meantime, Mrs. Jenkins, we need to keep you somewhere safe. She can stay at my ranch, Owen offered. The sheriff shook his head. That's the first place he'll look once he starts making the rounds outside town. No, I think the church might be best. Pastor Stevens and his wife have a room they keep for travelers. Your husband wouldn't think to look for you in a house of God. As they left the sheriff's office, Clara felt a prickle of awareness along her spine. Looking across the street, she saw him, Thomas Jenkins, immaculately dressed as always in a tailored suit, his silver-handled walking stick in one hand. Their eyes met, and even at a distance, she could see the cold fury in his face. Clara, he called, starting across the street. Thank God I've found you. Owen stepped forward, placing himself between Clara and the approaching man. Mr. Jenkins, I presume? Thomas stopped, his eyes narrowing as he assessed Owen. And who might you be? Owen Yates. I've been helping your wife since she arrived in Promise Creek. Thomas's smile was tight, not reaching his eyes. How very neighborly of you. But I can take care of my wife now. Clara, come along. We're going home. Clara stepped out from behind Owen, her heart racing but her voice steady. No, Thomas. I'm not going anywhere with you. Thomas's face darkened. Don't be ridiculous. You're making a spectacle of yourself. He reached for her arm, but Owen moved quickly, catching his wrist. The lady said no, Owen said quietly. For a moment, the two men stood frozen, Thomas's wrist caught in Owen's grip. Then Sheriff Harper emerged from his office, hand resting casually on his holstered gun. Everything all right here? Thomas jerked his arm free, smoothing his jacket. Perfectly fine, Sheriff. Just a misunderstanding. My wife has been unwell, and I've come to take her home where she can receive proper care. I'm not unwell, Clara said clearly. And I'm not going with you, Thomas. I'm filing for divorce. Thomas laughed, the sound devoid of humor. Don't be absurd, Clara. There are no grounds for divorce. You're my wife, and you're coming home where you belong. Sheriff Harper stepped forward. Mr. Jenkins, in this territory, a woman has the right to refuse to go with her husband if she chooses. Now, I suggest you check back into your hotel and cool off. Judge Wilson will be here in 2 days. You can make your case to him then. Thomas's face contorted with rage, but he controlled himself with visible effort. Very well. But this isn't over, Clara. His gaze shifted to Owen. And you, sir, would do well to remember that interfering between a man and his wife is dangerous business. As Thomas stalked away, Clara's legs nearly gave out. Owen caught her elbow, steadying her. You did well, he murmured. I'm terrified, she admitted. That's what makes it brave, Owen replied. The next 2 days passed in a strange limbo. Clara stayed with Pastor Stevens and his wife as planned, while Owen returned to his ranch but came into town frequently to check on her. Thomas remained at the hotel, occasionally seen walking the town's single street or drinking at the saloon, but he made no further approach to Clara. On the morning Judge Wilson was due to arrive, Clara sat in the small guest room of the pastor's house, reading the journal she had kept during her marriage. The cataloged brutality made her sick. A broken wrist explained away as a fall, ribs cracked from a beating after she'd spoken to a male guest at a dinner party, countless bruises and black eyes hidden beneath powder and carefully arranged clothing. Owen arrived to accompany her to the judge's hearing, which would be held in the town's small courthouse. When he saw her reading the journal, his expression darkened. You don't have to do this, he said gently. We could still get you on that stage to Helena. Clara closed the journal. No, I need to face him. For myself. Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then I'll be right beside you. Why? Clara asked suddenly. Why have you done all this for me? You barely knew me. Owen was quiet for a moment, considering his words. My sister, he finally said. She was married to a man like your Thomas. Fine manners, good family, respected in the community. Behind closed doors, he was a monster. What happened to her? Clara asked softly. She stayed too long. By the time I got her out, he'd broken more than just her spirit. Owen's eyes clouded with the memory. She lives in California now, with a good man who treats her like the treasure she is. But it took years for her to believe she deserved that kind of love. Clara reached out impulsively, taking his hand. Thank you for telling me. Owen squeezed her hand. I recognized something in you that first day in the store. Not just the bruises, but the way you held yourself like you were trying to disappear. No one should have to live that way, Clara. The courtroom was small but packed with curious townspeople. Judge Wilson, a stern-faced man with bushy eyebrows, presided from behind a simple wooden desk. Thomas sat on one side with a hastily procured local attorney, while Clara sat on the other with Sheriff Harper beside her and Owen directly behind. As the proceedings began, Clara's fear gradually gave way to a steely resolve. She presented her journal, answered the judge's direct questions about the abuse she had suffered, and met Thomas's glare without flinching. Thomas, for his part, painted Clara as mentally unstable, prone to hysteria and self-harm. My wife needs medical care, Your Honor, not divorce, he argued smoothly. I've only ever acted in her best interests. When it was Owen's turn to testify about the bruises he had observed, Thomas's attorney attempted to discredit him. Mr. Yates, isn't it true that you've been harboring Mrs. Jenkins at your ranch? That the two of you have developed an improper relationship? Owen's gaze remained steady. Mrs. Jenkins stayed at my ranch for her safety, with my foreman and his wife as chaperones. There's been nothing improper about my desire to help a woman in danger. The questioning continued for hours, Thomas growing increasingly agitated as Judge Wilson seemed to give serious weight to Clara's evidence. Finally, the judge called for a brief recess before rendering his decision. In the small anteroom where Clara waited with Owen and Sheriff Harper, she felt a strange calm. Whatever happened now, she had spoken her truth. She would not return to Thomas, even if it meant running again. You were magnificent in there, Owen said quietly, standing up to him like that. Clara managed a small smile. I don't feel magnificent. Just resolved. When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Wilson looked grim. Having reviewed the evidence and testimony presented today, I find sufficient grounds to grant Mrs. Jenkins a divorce on the basis of extreme cruelty. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Thomas half rose from his seat, face flushed with anger, but his attorney pulled him back down. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am issuing an order of protection prohibiting Mr. Jenkins from approaching or contacting Mrs. Jenkins. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. Clara sat in stunned silence. It couldn't be this simple, could it? After years of terror and pain, freedom granted with the stroke of a pen? Thomas was not so easily subdued. As the court adjourned, he pushed past his attorney and strode toward Clara. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You think some backwater judge's ruling will stop me? You're my wife. You belong to me." Sheriff Harper stepped between them. "That's enough, Mr. Jenkins. One more word, and you'll be spending the night in my jail." Thomas's eyes burned with hatred as they fixed on Clara. "You'll regret this," he said, before turning on his heel and stalking out. That night, Clara returned to Pastor Stevens's house to collect her belongings. Despite the judge's ruling and the sheriff's protection order, she felt uneasy. Thomas was not a man to accept defeat, especially not a public one that damaged his pride. Owen insisted on accompanying her. "At least until we're sure he's left town," he said. As they gathered her few possessions, Clara found herself hesitating. "What happens now?" she asked. "I have nowhere to go." Owen leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. "You could stay in Promise Creek. Mrs. Henderson would be happy to have you back at the store. Or, Clara prompted when he paused. "Or you could come back to the ranch. Not in the main house if that wouldn't be proper, but Louisa mentioned the old cabin near the creek could be fixed up nice for a single lady." He looked down, suddenly interested in the brim of his hat. "Ranch could use someone with your education, keeping the books and such." Clara felt a warmth spreading through her chest. "Is that the only reason you're asking me to stay?" Owen looked up, a smile touching his lips. "No, madam, it isn't. But I reckon you've had enough of men making demands on you. Whatever grows between us, if anything does, should grow in its own time." The tenderness in his voice nearly undid her. "I'd like that, to see what might grow." They were interrupted by a sudden commotion outside, shouting, then the alarming crack of a gunshot. Owen moved instantly, positioning himself between Clara and the window. "Stay here," he ordered, drawing a revolver from his belt that Clara hadn't realized he was carrying. But before he could reach the door, it burst open. Thomas stood there, a wild look in his eyes and a pistol in his hand. "Did you think I would just leave?" he snarled. "Let you humiliate me like this?" Owen raised his own weapon. "Put the gun down, Jenkins." Thomas laughed, a high, unhinged sound. The cowboy to the rescue. How touching. His eyes fixed on Clara. "Is this who you left me for? Some saddle tramp with dirt under his fingernails?" Clara straightened her spine, facing her husband directly. "I left because you're a monster, Thomas. Because you hurt me, again and again, and called it love. You ungrateful whore." Thomas spat, raising his pistol toward her. Several things happened at once. Owen lunged forward. Sheriff Harper appeared in the doorway behind Thomas, and two gunshots rang out almost simultaneously. Thomas crumpled to the floor, blood blooming across his expensive shirt. Owen staggered backward, his free hand going to his shoulder where crimson spread through his flannel shirt. "Owen!" Clara cried, rushing to his side as he sank onto the edge of the bed. Sheriff Harper knelt beside Thomas, checking for a pulse. After a moment, he looked up. "He's gone." Clara barely registered the words. Her attention focused on Owen. "How badly are you hurt?" Owen grimaced. "Just a graze, I think. Hurts like hell, though." The next hours passed in a blur. The town doctor was summoned to treat Owen's wound, which was indeed just a deep graze that required cleaning and bandaging. Thomas's body was taken to the undertaker's, and Sheriff Harper took statements from everyone present. "Clear case of self-defense," the sheriff assured them. "Men came in with a gun, threatening lives. No jury would say different." By dawn, Clara found herself sitting beside Owen's bed at the doctor's small infirmary. He was sleeping peacefully, his face relaxed in a way she had rarely seen it. "He'll be fine," Dr. Miller assured her. "Might have some stiffness in that shoulder for a while, but no lasting damage." Clara nodded gratefully, her eyes never leaving Owen's face. Thomas was dead. The reality hadn't fully settled in yet. The terror that had shaped her life for years ended in a moment of violence she wished hadn't been necessary. Owen stirred, his eyes fluttering open. When he saw Clara, a smile spread across his face. "You're still here." "Of course I am," she replied, taking his hand. "Where else would I be?" Thought you might have second thoughts. About staying in Promise Creek, I mean. After all this. Clara squeezed his hand. No second thoughts. This is where I want to be. 1 year later, Clara stood on the porch of the Yates ranch house, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. The bruises Thomas had left were long healed, though sometimes in her dreams she still felt the phantom pain of his hands. Those nights, she would wake to find Owen beside her, his presence a steady comfort in the darkness. They had married in a simple ceremony the previous spring, after a courtship conducted with such careful respect for her boundaries that Clara had finally been the one to propose. Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Yates? Owen's voice came from behind her as he stepped onto the porch, wrapping an arm around her waist. Clara leaned into his embrace. Just thinking about how much has changed in a year. Owen pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. Good changes, I hope. The best, she assured him, turning in his arms to face him. I never thought I could feel this. Safe. This love. You deserve it all and more, Owen said, his blue eyes warm with an emotion that still sometimes overwhelmed her. You're the bravest woman I know, Clara Yates. She smiled, remembering his words from that night on the porch so long ago. I don't have to pretend anything with you, do I? Never, he promised. Just be yourself. That's all I've ever wanted. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, Clara rested her head against Owen's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. The bruises were gone. The fear was fading, and in its place grew something she had almost forgotten existed: hope.